This is Blackjacked, a podcast about how the civil rights movement went left.
Oh man, I gotta get up. I gotta go. Ooh. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. I gotta get up and leave. I gotta get up and go. I gotta go.
Welcome back to Blackjack. This week is when we start to go deep. We're going to get to the heart of the matter, and it is this: why are we broke? The answer is, by and large, the civil rights movement and civil rights organizations never really had a comprehensive and cohesive economic development strategy. To a degree, they talk about economic justice, and today black organizations love to talk about economic justice, but they don't really talk economic development, and they certainly don't have a really great cohesive plan for it. Things that are hard to do require a plan. If you want to gain 20 pounds, that is very easy to do. Just sit and start eating. You do not need a strategy to gain 20 pounds. Very easy to do. If you would like to lose 20 pounds and have abs, that requires a plan. And you see that failure in the civil rights movement. The consequences linger to this day, and the numbers bear this out. If you go to 1968, when Dr. King is killed, black unemployment is 6.7%. The Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis says today it's about 6.3%. In 2017, it went over 7.5%. Black home ownership, 1968, 42%. Today, 44%. There's no movement here. And so ever since black people came to this country, we have worked for the benefit of, to enrich white people. I don't care if you're LeBron James and you make tens of millions every year. You are doing it for an owner. That basic dynamic has not changed. So you go back to episode 1, we talk about white dominance. That's the issue. You have to have a plan and a strategy. And so Dr. King, we talked about this before, at the end of his life, he's pursuing the Poor People's Campaign. He realizes that the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act did not rectify all this. And he wants the government to step in. The same government, they had to fight like God knows what to get them to agree that we should be able to sit at a lunch counter. He wants that same government to agree that we shouldn't be poor. Well, Dr. King, good luck. I mean, like, seriously, good luck. There's no plan on the ground. You know who does have a plan, though? The Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad. I'm going to pull a lot of this information from an article. It's called The Nation of Islam's Economic Program, 1934 to 1975, by Dr. Nafisa Muhammad. It's actually a really good article. I'd encourage you to look at it. But in 1964, which ironically is the same year that the Civil Rights Act is passed, Elijah Muhammad comes out with this plan. It's called the 3-year economic plan, also known as the National Savings Plan. And he wants to help black people achieve financial independence. What he wants, first of all, for 3 years, he wants his members to sacrifice. Do not buy anything you do not absolutely need. Sacrifice, cut back. With those savings, send that to Chicago. Send it here. We're going to take that money. We're going to reinvest it. By mid-60s, they've got farms in Michigan, Alabama, Georgia. They're providing fresh meat and vegetables for a number of supermarkets that they're developing. They are buying buildings for their printing press. They have an all-black crew printing their newspaper, which, by the way, is their largest business, their most lucrative business. Muhammad Speaks, that's their newspaper. By the time you get to 1974, they're turning out close to 1 million copies every week of that paper. They have a slaughterhouse for meat in Chicago. They're developing barbershops. They're developing other stores. By the time that you get to 1973, they have controlling interest in a bank, Guarantee Bank and Trust on the south side of Chicago. That bank has they grow to like $10 million in assets. They're employing more than 500 people with the bank. They've got restaurants. Now, 1974, they make this agreement with the Peruvian fishing distributor. They want to provide 1 million pounds of whiting fish, which they feel like a lot of these southern migrants, they need to get them off the catfish, that unhealthy stuff. Let's get them a better quality fish. Let's get them something cheaper. They get 1 million pounds. And they want to sell that door to door to black folks, Muslims and non-Muslims alike. In 1 month alone, the month of September of that year, they sold 200,000 pounds of fish. And so by the time you get to 1975, the nation is operating hundreds of businesses throughout the United States. We need to point out, this is not a huge organization. This is actually a pretty small organization. I think the article cites as being like their peak membership is something like 70,000 people in the early 60s. You have to understand, when you say membership, just like a lot of churches will say, oh, we got 10,000 members. And then there's active membership, like how many people actually show up. So I would imagine that 70,000 isn't actually 70,000. This is just what a small number of black people are doing in a very short amount of time. In fact, in 1966, Ralph David Abernathy goes to Chicago. Remember, Ralph David Abernathy is Dr. King's right-hand man. They go to Chicago in 1966 for their campaign against slum housing. And Ralph David Abernathy, he writes in his autobiography, he says that the black people with the highest standard of living in Chicago were the black Muslims. These are the people who don't vote, who don't protest anything, who do no political advocacy, but they have a higher standard of living. But they also have an economic development plan, and that's why.
We always talk about the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover's obsession with Dr. King, but the person that the FBI surveilled the most in this country was Elijah Muhammad. And you have to wonder, with this really small group of followers, why is J. Edgar Hoover this consumed with Elijah Muhammad? And maybe this is why.
That same year of 1966, Dr. King, along with A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin. Now, we talked about Bayard Rustin in the previous episode about the Vietnam War, and then A. Philip Randolph. If you don't know this brother, please Google him. I don't have time, but he's a very important figure. They have something called a freedom budget. They present a plan to the Johnson administration. They want the federal government to consider this budget that's going to end poverty and unemployment. They want full employment, all these things. Again, he's wanting this government that can't even really agree that you should be able to use a toilet to adopt a radical federal budget. But there's no economic development plan on the ground. The Nation of Islam has this dynamic plan and it's working, but they're Muslims and they have a crazy theology. And so, of course, the Christian ministers won't join that. They will ask their congregation to send money to the building fund. They will ask people to give money to a bail fund to bail out protesters. But they won't tell them to go home, save money, and let's join this plan for independence and we can do something about white dominance. They're not joining that plan. And what a huge missed opportunity. Again, the Nation of Islam is this really tiny fringe group that's doing all this stuff. But what if millions of Christians joined this plan? What would have happened? And I think that civil rights leaders and civil rights organizations, they didn't quite understand that if you are a minority group, particularly a group that is oppressed and senators and governors don't really like to pass public policy to directly address you, you better have a airtight plan. And your first job is to protect your people's economic well-being and their survival. Contrast that with the Korean Grocers Association. The acronym is KGRO. You have a moment of crisis in 1992, the Los Angeles riots. Rodney King gets beat, but right before that, a 15-year-old black girl, Latasha Harlins, gets shot in the back of the head by a Korean grocer. There are already hostilities because a lot of black people feel like these are not good neighbors to us. They are racist, they overcharge us, and now you're shooting our children in the back of the head. The riots erupt, and a lot of those stores owned by Koreans get targeted. Well, the Korea Times in 1992, May 1992, they actually report that the Korean grocers have a convention and they decide we got to do something. They decide that they're going to establish a national cooperative. So their merchants are going to be able, and again, they have merchants literally all over the country. They are organizing their people across the country with an economic plan, a development plan, a growth plan. And they say, you know what, we're going to form this cooperative. They decide they're going to get 5 or 6 distribution centers across the country up in just a couple of months. And this is going to enable their merchants to save up to 40% on merchandise. They're going to be able to cut the middlemen out. They're going to save a lot of money and they can pass it on to their black consumers. And this will help their relationships with black customers because now we won't be charging as much. The Koreans feel like we're having to compete with Walmart and these other big box stores. We can't do it. This will help us. Well, because in this moment of crisis, they have a target, they have a plan, people can get behind it. And so you have a large financial institution who guarantees a $30 million loan, which was unnamed, like we don't know who that institution is to this day that I know of. $30 million loan to help get this off the ground. And then you have other companies who kick in money. People who are in the wholesale food business like Coca-Cola, Philip Morris, Coors. They kick in about $5 million. Now, again, the LA riots kicked off because of black pain, but the people getting money are Koreans because there's this cohesive economic strategy that people can latch onto. Contrast that with George Floyd's murder. Again, crisis moment. And yes, people make pledges and a lot of those companies didn't honor any of their pledges. But even the ones who may have had intentions, like what was the target? There was some vague idea that we want to support black entrepreneurs, but where's the cohesive plan? Where is the organization? And so I think civil rights leaders and civil rights organizations didn't quite grasp that job number one, we've got to secure our economic survival, and we have to have a plan for that. Now, to be fair to them, we're not Korean. It's not the same thing. A lot of black leaders rightfully probably thought our first job is to secure our actual physical survival. Remember, episode 4, we talked about white allies. The NAACP felt like we have to really pursue anti-lynching because we don't expect much from the government. We have to just make sure we're not being lynched. We have to look for our actual survival. That's a very different experience. And indeed, it's an experience that the Koreans don't have in this country because black people fought that battle for them. They benefit from that. Their color or lack of being white doesn't automatically disqualify them from being able to do business. We had to fight that fight, and they benefit. Economically, it's different. Many of the Koreans who immigrate here in the past several decades, they're not coming from the same situation. A lot of black men spilled their blood on the Korean peninsula to make it a great target for American investment. The late Amos Wilson talks about this a lot. Dr. Amos Wilson, he talks about this very often. The relationship of the United States government to the Korean people is a lot different. And though they may not have been loved when they got here, they certainly were not being lynched. And so black leaders, it's understandable why their first thought wasn't, we have to have a blueprint for our economics. They were thinking survival. There's also probably a good amount of learned hopelessness. Again, we talk about the NAACP pursuing anti-lynching. And when that doesn't really happen, you have so many black business districts destroyed. It's not just Tulsa. It's not just in North Carolina. It's all over the place. You have the destruction of black business districts by the interstate system. At a certain point, maybe they just sort of gave up. And maybe not consciously. They just didn't believe that this can really happen. But again, Elijah Muhammad in 1964, when the Civil Rights Act passes, maybe it's connected, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a coincidence. But he understood we need to have a real blueprint here. And what a missed opportunity that other organizations did not join with that and make that their priority. But you can see when you follow the history that it's very unlikely that they would have ever made that a priority. It was never the mode of black civil rights organizations. This goes way back. In fact, W.E.B. Du Bois, he kind of falls out with the NAACP over this. During the Great Depression, he realizes that people are struggling and people are suffering. And he feels like the NAACP is talking about integration. People need a sandwich. Like, why are we talking about integration? There's no economic plan. And as you move forward, we think about the National Urban League. They've always been thought to be the more, progressive in terms of business and economics. What you see for the most part is a focus on jobs. Jobs is not an economic development program. And again, if your jobs are still subject to another group of people, that's not really a safe foundation. And so you see a lot of programs designed at getting black professionals in white companies, getting HBCU graduates, hired into these firms. You see a lot of these things, but you don't really see a comprehensive and a really focused economic development plan for black people. It never really happens. And then Dr. King, yes, he does see the need to pivot towards economics. And you see Operation Breadbasket. It's a program, the foundations of it actually come out of Philadelphia. There was a minister there who basically, black people boycott companies that don't hire black people, and they kind of like compel them to hire black people. So it's really, a jobs thing. And so that really gets escalated in Chicago because Jesse Jackson takes it over in Chicago, and really, he does an amazing job. And so, yeah, they realize that certain companies, they do business everywhere, but they really make their profit margins in the hood. So let's make that more difficult. We'll boycott you if you don't actually hire black people. But that has limitations. Again, these are still jobs that you don't control, and they depend on somebody else. And in fact, some of those boycotts backfired because the demands, a lot of those companies couldn't meet the demands, and they actually folded because they were boycotted and they actually went out of business. This is not a strategy for your people to develop their own economics and control your own economics. It's just not. Now, to be fair, Jesse Jackson does some creative things that actually push black entrepreneurship within that context. Like, for example, sometimes he negotiates with, let's say, big grocery chains to say, okay, you need to have black extermination companies make a contract with them, or you need to have black contractors build these buildings and different things. So he does do some things to sort of promote black entrepreneurship, but the core of the program was really pushing jobs through white companies. But you don't really see the real focus on we have to have a coherent, clear, and really unified economic development strategy for our people. And that was a major flaw. But there were serious opportunities for that, but they don't get taken up. And so we're going to get into that next week. We're going to start talking about some of those real big missed opportunities. And I'll give you a hint. One of them was the Montgomery bus boycott. The movement starts sort of on the wrong note. We'll get into that next time on Black Jack.
Get up and go, I gotta go, I gotta get up and go. They waiting on me when I walk out the door. They counting on me to get ready to blow. Too many people saying that I'm the hero. Too many people looking up to me. Can't let them down, not an option for me. Don't even matter if you rocking with me. I touch down even if you ain't blocking for me. No BS and no negativity. Only dealing with positive energy. Yeah, it's haters and doubters surrounding me. I don't pay them no man, they ain't stopping me. Like Brady and Jordan, no topping me. I'm MVP in every category. My confidence grows every day that I rise. Gotta get up and go, keep my eye on the prize. I gotta go, manifesting on my hopes and dreams. I gotta go, yo, I'm strategizing like I'm coaching the team. I got places to go, I got people to see, I got things to do. Yo, I'm through with surviving, it's time to start living, I don't know about you. That's what I see for myself, speak over my life, I got riches and wealth. Take it in stride one day at a time, no malice inside, I'm nothing but blessed.